Welcome back to lesson 8 here, where we're going to be building out a webhook, which allows us to send data outside of our website. This is going to be one of the most powerful lessons found in this entire series, so let's go and jump in. First off, if you don't know what a webhook is, what this allows us to do is send data outside of our web application or website. One example of this is our ability for a user to provide an email, and when they provide the email and hit subscribe, this sends the data of the email to whatever our newsletter provider is, MailChimp, SendGrid, etc. But what is super cool about today's lesson is the fact that you're going to learn how to do this kind of logic when it comes to API documentation for any use case. Specifically, one, you're going to learn the ability to integrate webhooks within your web application in a safe and secure way. And number two here is this gives you the ability and really opens the door for more intuitive interactions within your application when it comes to building out websites. Therefore, let's go ahead and do it. Let's jump in. The first half of this video is me building the user interface of this input form, e.g., how is it going to look on my website? And then the second half of this video is I'm going to show you how to secure webhooks. I'm going to show you how to read API documentation. I'll show you in any context for any type of API documentation how to understand it for what you're trying to do. Sound good? Let's do it. So up to this point, we've done a lot for our website here. Let's go ahead and just launch it, see where we've gotten to this point. So we're going to open up a terminal window, as you already know. You already know this. How do I know this, Corbin? Because you already watched all the other episodes, all right? You're caught up. You're good to go. We're going to come up here to this command here, npm start. Actually, first, we'll do our directory. And here's a quick little tip here, which is cool, is that if you want to do multiple commands in just one enter or just like one command line, you can copy it like this. Obviously, put your directory first and then npm start. And if I hit enter here, it's going to go into my directory and start it. Enter. Boom, good to go. This is where we left off after episode 7 here. And if you're watching this, you're part of my school community. So hello and welcome. And now in this next lesson here that we're doing today, we're going to add like a newsletter type of CTA form here, just right under our investments. What is super cool is that up to this point, we've built out a pretty intuitive web application. We have the ability now to do external links, nice little UI elements, pop up, hello, for the video, take website, content catalog, super cool stuff here. So from our structuring and from what you've seen up to this point, you already know when we build out this homepage.js, we're going to build out another component here. We'll put it between investment G and the footer here. And this is going to be our newsletter CTA. Let's go ahead and proceed. First off, we're going to create a new view here. That's going to be newsletter CTA. So new file, newsletter.cta.js. And then we'll create the CSS as well. With this created, we're going to do that copy paste method here. We're going to provide some context of how we want it to look. To be honest with you, kind of like how our top fold here looks with this right here. This nice little like component that is like a round rect that has this nice gradient feel. I'm going to use this as my reference image and then play around here. Obviously, I'll be back. I'll give you the inputs, the outputs, etc. for this first half of the tutorial where we're just creating the user interface first. And just as a side note, taking a step back here, when building components that are going to be more complex and intuitive, e.g. today's video, where it's going to have a webhook and we're going to be sending data out of it, it's always best to have the UI component made first, obviously. Now, it doesn't have to be perfect, but just have it made first so when you start working on functionality of the more complex stuff, you have something to play around with within your emulator. Sound good? I'll see you in a couple minutes. Here we go. So I went ahead and created our newsletter right here. So this is going to be an entire element / component that we can leverage in the context of sending emails to our newsletter provider. Let me go and show you how this UI looks in the sense of providing an email because you're going to see some animations here. In addition, let's go ahead and open up our console log. As when you start doing more complex elements with webhooks and sending data around, you're going to start leveraging the console log a little bit more. In order to do so, we're going to right click, hit inspect. To start off here, we added a nice little hover effect on the button. So if I hover here, we get like slightly enlarged, different color. If I just hit subscribe here, nothing will happen because there's nothing in the field. If I put random characters, nothing will happen again because it's not an actual email. Therefore, let's go ahead and provide a real email here. We'll do apples@gmail.com. Two things are about to happen. First thing is that you're going to notice an animation right here. The second thing is you're going to notice a console log right here. Subscribe. Nice little animation. I also have it so it circulates through some text. Look at you being all productive. Success. And then it will revert back to subscribe after 10 seconds here. And then jumping over here in the console log, you'll notice we get an email sent, apples@gmail.com. Let's see how I did it. The first part here, obviously, is just user interface. Therefore, in order to do that, I always like to start my chats, a brand new chat, provide context of general direction I want to go. So I provided this screenshot of our top fold of like the UI elements and went ahead and prompted like this. Okay, today we're creating a newsletter CTA section for our website. Call the files newsletter CTA, newsletter CTA CSS. You'll need to have an input field for email and a submit button, which for now points to console log of sent email. not, because we're not even actually sending the email yet to the API. Attach image is reference of the UI I like, and here is some CSS to match. So basically all I did was I grabbed the CSS of this little round rectangle right here, provided it as well for more context. And then I simply said, okay, give me all the code. Same situation here from past tutorials, copy the entire JS, paste over, copy the entire CSS, and paste over. So that's going to give you a starting point of where to go here. And then obviously, once we have this done, we're going to see what the export name is. So in this context, it's newsletter CTA. We're going to come to our homepage here. We're going to import this file. I'll go ahead and zoom in, y'all. We're going to go ahead and import this file, and then we will place it right here. If you're building a multi-page website, I suggest you to put the newsletter CTA within the components folder. Treat it like a component, e.g., I have the newsletter CTA here. Maybe I'm on the About Me page, and I want to import it there as well. Go ahead and just import it there like this. And what this does is that this one single line here will import this as an element throughout our entire website. So one right here, and then obviously I put one under the footer, reload, one right there. Use this component however you like. Now you can import this anywhere on your website, and the functionality will persist throughout once we add the webhook to it. For me though, since the website I'm creating is just a landing page, I just need one page, most simply place it right there. Now let me go ahead and show you how I prompted ChatGPT in order to get this effect with an animation that lasts 10 seconds and it circulates through different text. Pretty cool. Went ahead and said this. Okay, looking better. Let's do a couple things. First thing, when we successfully subscribe a user, button does a cool animation and say success with a party emoji, show that for 10 seconds. Couple things to know here. First thing, I didn't actually identify the animation. I just said do a cool animation. Keep this in mind. Just use layman dictation to put in a general direction. And then the animation it gave me was like that little hover effect, which I thought was pretty cool. So simply all I needed to do was simply copy the JS, paste it. Copy the CSS, paste it. Scrolling down here, what you'll notice is that what creates the animation effect within CSS is what we call keyframes. And they specifically called it pulse. So in this context, the animation you saw was like getting larger, getting smaller, getting larger, and getting smaller. That's the pulse effect here. And it's referenced as animation here, pulse, 2 seconds, infinite. If that doesn't make that much sense, don't worry. That's the whole point of the way I've been showing you how to create these websites. It's very much like ask questions or alternatively, copy the code, paste it over. Does this time look good? It does? Okay, keep proceeding. Therefore, to ask it to circulate through different messages once we're in a success mode was pretty simple. Also, let's make it on success. We cycle through different texts like success, saving time, etc. And as you see, it provided me all the code right there to the extent of cycling the messages as well. Now, obviously, you can tell it the type of messages. For me personally, I was like, we need a little bit more banter, more stuff that's like related to email right there. So I got messages like, we won't spam you, promise. Oh, a new email. Save me time, like a boss, stuff like that. What's also nice when you code with ChatGPT is that you'll get comments like this. And this is supposed to make the code more clear. For example, if I look at this right here, what does this 10,000 mean? Oh, okay, this means 10 seconds. And what we know in the context of what we've told ChatGPT up to this point is that we wanted to display a message for 10 seconds or have an effect for 10 seconds. So in this context, this is the keyframes pulsing effect that will only last 10 seconds after we hit submit. In addition, what you'll notice is ChatGPT will also name the elements specifically of what they're doing. So I have cycle messages, and this is the context of when we're cycling through the relevant messages we provided here. Now, initially, when I pasted these success messages, I actually got an error. Typically, you can just copy and paste the error code you get into ChatGPT and it'll help you out, or alternatively, take a screenshot. With the error I got, I just screenshotted it with a little bit of a hover effect saying, hey, I got an error, what's up? And with that, it gave me the correct code and also a comment of what was the correction for the error. So for this context, the error was the fact that we didn't have this backslash here. So for example, if I remove it, you'll notice the error come back. But now that we learned through ChatGPT that you need one of these to handle apostrophes in this kind of code, we're good to go. That covers most of what we need to know when it comes to submitting and the UI associated with this newsletter. Let me actually do one more with you that's actually pretty fundamental. We're going to have it so that when I hit success and it does that little animation, we're actually going to disable the subscribe button for 15 seconds. And the reason we're going to do this is to mitigate spam and have a debounce logic shown to you. Therefore, what are we doing? We're coming to our button here. This is the button. Copy. And what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to start a new chat. I'm going to provide the entire JS file and the entire CSS file and then request the following delay or disabling. Working here today, here's the JS, here's the CSS. Paste. It's going to give me some random output. Don't care. Stop it. Let's ask what we want. Let's learn two fundamental things when it comes to dealing with passing data and specifically giving the user the ability to pass data in this context, hitting submit and their email. First major thing, you want to add disable logic. You want to have the ability where the button itself is disabled for 10 to 15 seconds after dealing with this kind of payload. Why? You don't want people spamming you. Second major thing, you're going to learn about local storage right now. What is local storage? This is our way of caching data on the user's web browser. Why is that relevant? If we didn't cache this 15 seconds on the user's browser, as you will see, this will make more sense. The user could simply hit reload and then hit submit again and proceed. Sound good? Enter. Before I hit enter, the prompt for this button, provided the button, have it so when I click subscribe, it is successfully, and we also disable the button for 15 seconds to mitigate spam. In addition, save to local storage this 15 seconds, so if the user reloads page, can't click again. Enter. Provided the entire JS, copy, paste. Provided just one additional CSS element here, which is going to be how the button looks when it's disabled, copy, paste. Now, what I like to do is that for CSS elements that are related to the same item on the React front end, we're going to go ahead and just make sure we pair them near each other. Newsletter CTA button, button on hover, button on disabled. I'll go ahead and showcase this on the front end, but let me explain a little bit. Specifically, what I'm going to explain here is going to be the local storage. As I said before, this is going to save the specific element of 15 seconds, so date now to last time submitted. So the button is going to be disabled for 15 seconds, even if the user reloads, which you'll see here pretty soon here. But one thing I want to know is that the actual local storage item that we're getting, we name it. So we're naming it last submit time, which is fine because the context of the web page we're creating today is just a landing page. It's not that deep. But if you're creating software, specifically when a user is logged in, typically when it comes to setting local storage items, you want to put something unique within the actual storage item itself, e.g. the user's email or e.g. the user's UID, which is a unique identification number that's provided in the context of authentication software. Don't worry, I'm going to make videos on it. But in this video, we're just going to call it last submit time. So how do I confirm that this button can't get spammed for 15 seconds even on user reload? Pretty simple, actually. In order to confirm that, we're going to have the console log open here. And what would happen is that if the user could spam in theory, then we would see multiple console logs. But what you'll notice is that, one, the button's going to have a different UI that shows it's disabled. But two, on reload, that UI is going to persist, which is going to allow us to make sure that they can't get away with just spamming it by reloading, spam, reloaded, spam, etc. I'm saying spam a lot. I do like spam. If you cook it on the skillet, get it nice and crisp, put some Tabasco on it, hot coffee. If you got sourdough and an egg, proceed. Let's check this out. Got my email here. Hit subscribe. I am trying to spam it. Notice how my button is disabled. Can't spam it. I'm going to reload the page. Oh, I'm going to get away with it. Come down here. Still can't hit it. Pretty good, right? And then this should go away in 15 seconds. So let's see if it pops back up so I can hit subscribe. It does. Pretty successful. Now that we have the user interface set up here, let me show you how to start connecting webhooks within your web application. I'm not going to cut off and then show you step by step how I did it post. I'm going to do it live with you because this is pretty fundamental and important to understand. Let's begin. Step number one, know what you're trying to connect to. This is going to be external providers, e.g. MailChimp, e.g. Zapier, whatever you're trying to connect to, know what you're trying to connect to. Once you know, so in this context, we're doing newsletter, right? Is it MailChimp for you? Is it Klaviyo? What is it? For me, it's going to be called MailBluster. MailBluster. Whatever it is, you're going to put the name of it. So let's say it's MailChimp. We would do MailChimp API documentation. Enter. Come down here, select the first link. Right here is where we're going to be able to find everything we can do within MailChimp through software / a web application. Now, this can get very confusing very fast. So what I suggest you to do is speak more layman within Google. MailChimp API documentation for creating new lead. And typically what this allows you to do is just jump directly to the part that you care about. So in this video, what we care about is that when a user signs up, provides an email, we sign them to an audience list. So in the context of MailChimp, to speak more in the dictation, it'd be like subscribe to an audience. I'd come down here to list an audiences. Like, okay, what's going on here? I got to find this subscribe to audience. Another great way to approach this is using Zapier. So in this context, we could use a Zapier webhook to then pass the data, and then Zapier makes it very user-friendly. So for example, what you'll see in today's tutorial, you could reference a Zapier webhook. And then let's say we're doing that MailChimp example again. I can come over to MailChimp. And then obviously I would create a trigger of that webhook and then use one of these actions found within Zapier where it's like new customer, new audience, new subscriber in that way. Also, Zapier is a great tool in the sense of just looking at the Zapier apps. If you type in Zapier apps, you could kind of just look in a UI-friendly way of different actions you could do within different softwares, which then you could translate with the method I'm about to show you within your web application. For me, though, I'm using MailBluster. Why are you using MailBlaster, Corbin? Because they don't charge on audience list size. It's like infinite, and that's kind of, for my use case, what I care about. So right off the bat, let me just go and explain some terminology here as if you've never dealt with webhooks before. So once you find what you need to do, so for me, we're creating a new lead. Here's a couple things. First thing is you're going to notice that the specific event you're going to want to do is a post. When you think of post, like we're just sending the data. We're not receiving it. We're sending it from the website to MailBlaster. The next question is, okay, how we're sending it? We are sending it through this link here, which will make more sense, and we'll use ChatGPT to leverage this. The next thing that typically matters in a webhook when you send it to a provider is like what is actually required. And as you'll notice, they quite literally will have columns called required. This is data that is required or not for you to even send this correctly. So what you'll notice is that the only thing that's actually required here is an email. Pretty good. So let's get going here. Let's create a webhook we can start sending. Whatever provider you use, I'm obviously going to blur out that key that is currently active. Whatever provider you use, go to the settings or find out where you can go to the API key section. Typically with these providers, it's typically found in settings. If it's not, just type in Google XYZ platform, create an API key, and then it will show you where to go. For me, it's in settings, and I come up here to API keys. Now within the API key settings, you're going to simply hit create new key. You're going to give a name for the key so you know where to reference it. So for me, it'd be like Web Cafe landing page. And I may hide this key or I may not. Actually, no, I'm not going to hide this key. I'm actually going to delete it after this. So I'm going to just say dummy key and then put in the real one after this tutorial. Say create API key. So with my dummy key here, which go ahead, try to copy it. It's not going to exist. I'm going to go ahead and copy it. The reason I'm copying it is so I can make this as easy as possible for someone that has never dealt with webhooks. Let's make this as easy as possible. As a side note, what an API key is with your web application, it tells MailBlaster that you actually have access to that account because you're accessing it from an external source. You're not accessing the functions and functionalities of MailBlaster within MailBlaster, like the website MailBlaster. You're accessing functionalities through a separate domain. So they want to confirm that like that's actually you. You actually have access to that account, which goes without saying, don't share your API key publicly. Now let's make our lives easy. I'm gonna provide the entire JS file and CSS file of our newsletter CTA right there. Now, in theory, in the context of what we're about to do, we don't really need to provide the CSS. A good practice, maybe halfway through the chat, you want to do something like with the CSS. For now, though, provide everything. First half of this is I'm going to show you how to just do everything correctly from start to finish. Second half is I'm going to show you how to implement security on this webhook. Let's proceed. As you know, we're giving functionality to a very specific button. That button is our subscribe button. Therefore, proceed to your code, get that exact piece of code that's going to do the action of this webhook, and copy. And this next prompt here is we're going to front load it. We're going to say, okay, for this button, we will have it so we can actually start sending the email to MailBlaster API. I'm giving the specific name. I'm giving context here. Is this MailChimp? It's MailChimp API then. And here's what we're going to do. This is going to seem a little savage, but because I'm doing this in the context of you've never done this before, I want you to go to that page and everything that seems relevant to setting up that lead, grab your cursor and just drag up everything. Let's give as much context as possible. Boom. Command C. It's not gonna look pretty. I'll do semicolon here. Command V. Just the entire page. Now let's provide our API key. So it just enters it into the code for us and then see what happens. Our API key, paste, and here we go. Enter. And it's giving us the code. I mean, look how powerful this is, y'all. Assuming you have no knowledge on webhooks, and obviously you'll learn more about how to handle webhooks as you do more, right? So when you copy this code over, you can start reading it a little bit, and over repetition, it'll become more clear what everything means. But all I did was just paste a bunch of data, give it a direction, and we got our code here. I'm gonna hit copy code, Command A, paste. With that simple paste here, let's just see if it even works. And then if it works, I'll walk you through and give you a little bit more context of what's happening there. This is currently a live list here. Obviously, I'm going to have to blank out everything over there to, protect people's emails here. But let's go ahead and proceed, give a real email, and see if it shows up here. So when dealing with webhooks and dealing with data passing, always do inspect and always open your console log here. Because what you'll notice is that within that code we received from ChatGPT, we actually get some console logs here to help us debug more of what could possibly happen here. So if everything works correctly, what I expect to see is lead added and then the payload, the data that we found here. I'll explain more what this means. Let's just see if it works. I'm gonna provide my email here. When I hit subscribe here, we should see new lead added. Boom. And it didn't work at all. We'll get a ton of errors here. And let's go ahead and walk through this and how do we solve that? What happens when we get errors, Corbin? Because wasn't that supposed to work? Let's find out. If you have no clue what's occurring here, what I suggest you do is just simply copy this entire thing. Let me go over here and just say, from this code, I got semicolon, paste the entire thing. Hit send. So what you'll notice is that the issue we got is cores. It's cores related. This actually doesn't have to do with the fact that the code is bad, but this is more of a security thing found within browsers. More specifically, MailBlaster doesn't really accept incoming communication from localhost 3000, which is our development environment. If this doesn't really make sense, don't worry. Here's the two major things you need to understand. First major thing is that when you push it to a live website, it should work, e.g. webcafeai.com, and I'll showcase it working. Second major thing is that let me show you a cool Chrome plugin you could use to circumnavigate this. This extension is not 100% reliable, but it's reliable enough in the context of coding. You're typing cores. It's going to be cores unblock. Don't turn this on indefinitely, but only turn this on when you need to do development type of situations like this. Basically, only have this, the color orange, the color C here, orange, when you do these tests, and have it off for everything else. Alternatively, just push this to your prod environment, which would be your actual live URL, and do the same test. So I'm going to go ahead and put our email here, turn on our cores extension, and I'm going to be honest with y'all. Sometimes this works, sometimes it doesn't. So if this doesn't work here, then I'm going to go ahead and just push this to prod. I'll go ahead and show you how to do that again, and we'll retest in a live link. It worked that time. Pretty good. So what you'll notice is that we get the console log of lead added here, relevant lead information. So I keep opening up this stuff, and there we go, Corbin at webcafeai.com. Then obviously with all that blanked, but the email that we just subscribed, you see it works, and we see we got the data. Cool. For all that working, and honestly, I just saved you probably a huge headache from that cores policy. I remember running into that in the early days of my development phase. I was like, what's going on? I'm reading too much. What's going on? I hope that solved that for your situation. Just for context, that's purely a web security thing. Code's not bad. It's web, cores, etc. Let me go to explain this code to you a little bit better here. Then let me show you how to secure this code. First thing for you to understand is when you're looking through your return statement, which is this right here, you might be like, I don't know where that entire event is even occurring. Like, I don't know when the data is being sent or what's causing that action. What you can do is from this, you can see that on submit, it's putting it into brackets, handle submit. So if I scroll over or do Command F here, it'll bring me up to the specific function that's doing this webhook call, handle submit. Scrolling down here, what you'll notice is that it encompassed logic that we had earlier, such as the local storage. Pretty cool here. And then now this is the webhook itself. First super cool thing about this code that we got here is that we have debugging logs. So if you ever get errors like we did earlier, we'll get a nice little debug log that we can paste into our ChatGPT chat. Now, when you actually push to prod or production or just your live website link, I comment these out. So I'm going to comment them out. A nice little shorthand is going to be command / or control / and it'll automatically comment these out for us. Next, what you'll notice is this is our webhook. First thing you'll notice is our API key, which we'll secure pretty soon here. This is the payload. This is what we're sending MailBlaster. And then finally, this is that link that you saw early in the API documentation that we're referencing. We provide the payload here, which is going to be the method of post of how we're providing the payload. What you'll notice the payload here is the lead data, these two right here. In addition, you'll notice the authorization. What's the authorization in this context? This is the API key. This tells MailBlaster that we have access to this account. So API key, send it that way. Now I know in the early days of coding, and especially if you've gotten up to this point and you're kind of fresh to coding and you're still learning front-end development, this may be like a lot for you to take in. I know it was for me the early days of when I started coding, but don't worry. What you'll realize is over time, especially when using ChatGPT, and you saw how I solved that error there, it gets easier. Because when I look at this, it all connects easier than it did way in the beginning. So over time, when you deal with more API documentation and you start referencing it like this, it all becomes more clear of how to approach this kind of logic. So now that we've done all that, let's learn how we secure this. So I want to make sure I blank this out again, which is my Firebase high sensitive data, which we did at like lesson 2. But the way we secure this is we go to our .env, come over to .env, which we set up earlier, and we're going to set up our webhook here. This is pretty cool. For context, what this does is when we put high risk variables, such as this webhook right now, in our front end, when we deploy, we're not going to be actually revealing our key or anything that is pertinent that someone could abuse. So this is always a good practice that when you have high risk variables, this is how we implement it in our code. You're going to do React app, and we're going to put for our context, MailBlaster_key. Personally, when reading stuff in the code, I like putting the exact thing that I am referencing right there. So MailBlaster key. Okay, what's next, Corbin? Provide the key. There we go. Key is provided. And now let's learn how we implement that within our code file. And the way we do this is this. So right now it's const.api key. Where is this reference? Double click it. Okay, it's reference right there. Double click this, paste over, process.env, referencing the env file here, and then the relevant name. So as we named it, React App Mail Blaster key. Now we've secured the API key, which is the high risk variable within this webhook. That just about does this video. We learned how to send data through webhooks, also securely send data through webhooks. In addition, learning how to consult with API documentation as if you never read a single line of webhook code. The next lesson we'll do here is how to create a contact-like form, finally connect this to a custom domain, and then have my website live. So yes, I'm not gonna have to pay Webflow that $18 very soon. I'll see you in that lesson.